Zig in the Zone, back again, episode number 5. Thank you, Paulie, for putting this all together. Paulie B.
Thank
Uh,
you, Zig, for being here. I appreciate it. We couldn't keep the lights on without you, buddy.
well, God bless us both.
God bless us both. So, what do you got going on today, bud?
Well, I've got my sidekick with me, Eric Gray. How are you, Eric?
I'm fine, Ralph. Thanks for having me back.
It's a Met day for me because we finally get around to talking about the late Bud Harrelson, who died right before I started this. And one of my guests today is Stephen Goldleaf, who is a distinguished writer in his own right, as are you. And Stephen wrote for Bill James. So he really has his finger on the new age statistics, but he and I have done many podcasts together. Statistics don't come up. We're going to talk about humanity. And Stephen was at the game when Pete Rose and Bud Harrelson kind of linked up, if you will, in 1973. And he's just a terrific communicator. He's going to be on very soon. In the second segment, Robert Cole, the Met aficionado from the Comfortably Zoned radio network. And Robert and I have done the Met show along with Marty Rose. And that brings me around to my oldest friend in the world. Marty and I were in the second grade together. Marty and I would ride our bikes from Jackson Heights to Flushing to go to the Y when we were 10 years old. We'd ride through down Corona in the worst neighborhoods at that time, the most dangerous. We were 10. We would ride the subways at 10 years old, living in New York, to every imaginable game. Marty's uncle, first of all, Marty's dad worked for the AP, and Marty's uncle was an esteemed sports writer, a boxing writer named Murray Rose, who wrote about the Olympics and had access to what they called papering the house. Every team, the Rangers, the Knicks, roller derby, he'd supply us with tickets where we got to see the holiday festival, the NITs as young kids. It fueled my passion for sports. Marty and I, when I started doing podcasting, he was still working for the AP, following in his uncle and his dad's footsteps. And Marty and I would talk sports as kids, hanging on the corner of Jack and Manny's Deli in Jackson Heights, along with Stan Weiss and Braverman and all the buds, talking sports. And that's what we did. Now, when Marty retired from AP and moved to Florida, he joined the Comfortably Zoned radio network, and along with the aforementioned Robert Cole, who will be joining us later, did, and myself and his brother Bernie Rose, we did a Mets podcast on a weekly basis for 5 years. So Robert Cole has his finger on the button. That'll be a great interview. Now I gotta tell you about Mert a little bit. I joined the Air Force to keep out of Vietnam. Stephen Weiss, one of our buds, joined the Air Force to keep out of Vietnam. Mert joined the Air Force at same recruiter to keep out of Vietnam. Stephen never went to Vietnam. Stephen and I were both stationed in California. Mert went to Vietnam. Now, he came back apparently healthy at that time, we thought. He had damage from Agent Orange, which they suspect was the contributing cause to his diagnosis about 2 years ago with ALS. My closest friend, my age. We walked to school. We walked to Newtown High School together, along with Alan Mayer, and we went. I mean, the things we shared. He knows I'm heartbroken, and I'm carrying on doing this video podcast in his honor. He's struggling, of course. His family, his lovely wife, Peg, his daughters, his granddaughter. This is just terrible. So, on the air for the first time on video, I want to tell you, Mert, that we're hurting as a network, and you're loved by many people in the Jackson Heights family. We have a website that Wayne Unger put together, and we're all rooting for you. So why don't we bring on Stephen
Goldleaf?
And I'm gonna let Eric and Stephen get to know each other.
So do a great intro for Stephen. What do we got? Tell us about Stephen.
Goldleaf is one of the greatest interviews that I've had ongoing at Comfortably Zoned. We Talk Ball. Stephen Goldleaf is worked with Bill James. You're a writer for Bill James. Am I correct? Stephen, are you with us?
I'm here. Yep.
All right, you're listening to this, aren't you? And Stephen Goldleaf, our theme today is to honor the memory of the heart of the New York Mets, who passed away very recently. We've been trying to get it all together on this show to honor him, Bud Harrelson. And Stephen Goldleaf, what did you? I know your main memory of Bud Harrelson is when he entangled with Pete Rose. Where were you sitting? What are your memories of that day? 1973, my favorite Met team of all time. We've talked about this. The only World Series game I've ever seen was in Oakland with the Mets playing the Oakland sixth game, the Mets playing the A's. And Stephen, tell me about your day.
I was a student in college at 1973, and I just happened to have somebody in my dorm who was selling scalp tickets to the Mets playoff game, which is the only playoff game or series game that I've ever attended. And I was sitting in the right field bleachers when the fight broke out, and I was an eyewitness. That was, one of the most exciting things that I'd ever seen. And what made it more exciting, of course, was the fact that I just detested Pete Rose. And this went all the way back to his rivalry with Ron Hunt, who broke in at the same time. They were both rookie second basemen. They had virtually identical stats in 1963. And for some reason, the voters decided that Pete Rose was the overwhelming choice for the Rookie of the Year award. So they gave it to Rose, and I was a big Ron Hunt fan. And from that moment on, I decided that Pete Rose was one of the lowest life forms on the planet. So 10 years later, when Rose got into the fight with Harrelson, there was no question, of course, that I was on Harrelson's side and that we were all rooting for him. But as you probably know, the fans in the left field bleachers, where Rose was playing, Rose was a left fielder at the time, decided the next inning, when the fight cleared up and Pedro Bourbon had done what he did to digest part of a Mets cap, um, the fans just inundated Rose with apples, sandwiches. Um, I'm sure there were a couple of liquor bottles being thrown at him, and they almost halted the game.
Didn't
So
they,
this
didn't Willie
troop of
Mays come
Mets
out
heroes.
and didn't
I'm
Willie
sorry.
Mays come out and plead
Yeah,
with
well,
the fan?
Mays was among the contingent. I think it was Mays,
Gil Hodges?
Tom Seaver for sure, Yogi, and Rusty Staub, who had already hit 2 home runs in that game, and Mays all went out to left field and basically begged the fans out there to, put down their arsenal and let the game continue. Because I think the Mets were leading by some ridiculous score, like 9-2 at the time, which I think was probably the main impetus behind Rose deciding to stir up some anger on the Reds team by starting the fight with Harrelson in the first place. But of course, it was a terrific mismatch because Harrelson was probably 50 pounds and a few inches slighter than Rose. So it wasn't much of a fight, sort of a fight like uh, bug on the windshield is a fight.
But Bud
But
Harrelson did not
the
back
larger
down.
brawl took place.
He did not back down, did Bud Harrelson?
No, he gave as good as he got. And
Yeah.
unfortunately, what he had wasn't all that much to give.
Stephen, let me ask you a
I'm
question.
not.
I remember
Yep.
the incident, but not that clearly. From your perspective, was Rose's slide dirty? I mean, I think about this when I think, for example, go several decades later when Utley slid into Tejada, and after that play, every Philly fan thinks that slide was fair, and every Met fan thinks the slide was dirty. Was Rose's slide clean or dirty?
I don't actually think the fight was over the slide. I mean, it was just probably a ordinary tough slide into second base trying to break up the double play. But Harrelson had words with Rose because Harrelson had said before the game, which I thought was a pretty self-effacing comment, that in the previous game, when I think maybe I don't know who it was, but somebody had limited the Reds to very little offensive output. And and Harrelson said for the newspapers that morning that the Reds looked like him, meaning Bud Harrelson, at the plate, and they took this as a great insult. So Rose and Harrelson got into it verbally, and I think that's how the fight started. I don't think it was anything having to do with the slide itself. It was just that there was some incidental contact, and then they just started barking at each other.
Bud Harrelson is universally loved. He's an icon. What do you?
Well, one of the things is that he's literally a symbol of all those very light offenses on the Mets. In other words, the Mets were, pretty much a team of pitching and defense in that era. And Harrelson and Jerry Grody, I think, were wonderful defensive ball players and not very much offensively. So to me, they epitomize what the Mets teams were all about, in addition to, Seaver and Kuzman, of course.
They won in a way that you don't see teams going for now. Home run is everything. Getting them
Yeah,
on.
well, I think now the tendency is to put offensive players in at shortstop and say that it's not all that important, their ability to field. I think we've come to accept the fact that if you have a guy who can hit 30 or 40 home runs playing shortstop, he doesn't have to be the greatest defensive player in the history of the game.
Although a lot of shortstops now who are great defensive players also have the power. I mean,
Oh, absolutely.
Lindor is a really good defensive shortstop, and the guy can hit. And I think a lot of this started. I mean, I guess with Ernie Banks certainly was a great shortstop and great power hitting, power hitter. But I guess maybe like in the Cal Ripken era is when offensive being an offensive threat at shortstop became more common than just being a defensive star.
Well, that's true, and I think that a lot of the um, defensively skilled players who aren't very much on offense, and here I'm thinking particularly of a player like Ray Ordonez, um, are considered, let's say, unfashionable to give them a starting role, and I can't really disagree with that. I mean, I think that was actually one of Bobby Valentine's greatest errors, was to install Ordonez at shortstop and say basically it doesn't matter if he hits or not because look at his fielding. And I think that probably cost the Mets a couple of games during Valentine's tenure as the Mets manager. And I don't think you could really get away with that sort of thing at this point. I think in 2024, a player with Ordonez's particular skill sets is probably going to be a defensive replacement in the late innings rather than a starting player who gets up 500 or 600 times per season.
May I digress from the Mets for just 1 second
Please.
while we're talking about shortstops? When A-Rod came over to the Yankees, he moved to third base. Now, clearly, A-Rod had more range than Jeter, and it all seemed to have worked out. But were you a little, just as a baseball fan? I'm Yankees neutral. If anything, I've come to be Yankee plus. I'm just asking the question as a baseball fan to both you and Eric. Would have it been better if it would have helped A-Rod be recognized as the greatest shortstop of all time? And people forget that whether or not extracurricular drugs got into it or not, we'll settle that another time. Well, you still have to settle Barry Bonds and Clemens and what have you. But it helped to make A-Rod um, less of looking back. He loses a little luster besides the luster he lost with the the alleged drugs. Well, first, your opinion, if you would.
Hey, sure. Well, I mean, I think this was mostly a matter of ego on Jeter's part. I think that he was recognizing that shortstop for the New York Yankees is a very prestigious position, and he didn't want to be moved off of shortstop. And I think if you could have argued, if you could have somehow shown him that he was no better and probably less gifted than Rodriguez was at short, and that the Yankees would be a stronger team if he were moved somewhere else to second base, I think would have been his best position, or possibly first base, because he really didn't have a very good throwing arm. um, I don't think he would have bought that argument. He would have said, "Well, I'm not really talking about who's better or who's worse. I'm the Yankees shortstop, and A-Rod is a newcomer, and he can learn to play some other position." I think
You
that
use
was
the right word, ego. And in life, how many times, just rhetorically speaking, have we all been led down the primrose lane by our own personal egos?
Well, I mean, I don't know. I'm not a Yankee guy anymore, but I would imagine that Jeter was consulted in the whole hiring of A Rod, and what would it mean in terms of positions. And I'm sure he stated, again, I'm just speculating, that he would have stated his opinion about that, and clearly in advance of signing A Rod, just saying, I don't want to move off of shortstop.
Yeah.
well. I made a parallel at one point, and I guess this is going to get us back towards the Mets. Although, let me just read to you from the opening passage of Norman Mailer's book, The King of the Hill. The opening sentence is, "It is the great word of the 20th century. If there is a single word our century has added to the potentiality of language, it is ego." Um, and A parallel situation to Jeter's went on with the Mets, and I think these two players who I'm about to name were rather similar, which is Jeter and Mike Piazza for the Mets. And when the Mets were making the case that Piazza ought, for the betterment of the team, consider a change of position to first base, Piazza resisted it with absolute ferocity. And I think the reason for that was that he wanted to hold the all-time record for most home runs hit as a catcher. And his reluctance, and I think his performance ultimately, when they did move him to first base, reflected that he was simply saying, I don't care what arguments you have to make. I don't want to play first base. I don't want to play any place else but catcher, because I think that cements my identity, and the home run record for catchers, by doing that. And I thought there were a lot of similarities both between Piazza and Jeter, in this regard, but also in many other ways. Just incidentally, I noted that they were the two players who most prominently um, made common the act of signaling backward with their hand to the umpire when they was standing in the batter's box that they wanted time called. And I think that was a kind of turning point, that when these two players wanted the pitcher not to be able to deliver and wanted to be able to get set in the box, both of them felt very comfortable just sort of taking one hand off the bat, putting it up like a stop sign in back of them, and signal to the umpire, don't call time in yet. Don't give the pitcher permission to throw. And the umpires complied. And I think that they just had these similarities of, shall we say, self-esteem that I think came to change the way the game was played in small ways and in some large ways.
Uh, what are the most significant changes that you've seen since back in the day when you were a kid to baseball? Good, bad, or indifferent? What's changed the most in your eyes?
Mostly, I think it's the pace of the game. I think that in the last year they've instituted some stringent measures to speed up the game. But I think I did a study, when I was writing for Bill James a few years ago, that just explored the difference in the length of the game. And one of the differences had to be how many players on average played in an average major league game. And I think I came up with a figure. I'm just speaking off the top of my head now, but I think there was something like an average of 12 players in a game during the 1940s and 1950s, and that number had gone up by over 50%, over 18 or 19 players per game, because there were so many pitching changes and assorted substitutions since then. And that really hasn't changed. I think essentially what's happened is that managers learn that slowing down the pace of the game was good for their team. That, for example, throwing a lot of pitches um, became a good thing. When I was, I'm sure when you were a kid and when we were all kids, Ralph, um, you heard a lot of calls
Many
of,
moons
um,
ago.
you know, just hit anything if it looks good. And, if you could hit the first pitch or the second pitch, that was a good thing to do. You were moving the game along. Now, the goal, it seems, is even if you make an out, see if you can drag the at bat out for 7, 8, 9 pitches. And that's a good thing, whether you get a hit or not, because you tire the pitcher out. And as a result, you start seeing routinely 8 or 9 pitch at bats, and I think that makes the game last longer. And a lot of these other smaller things, they all add 10, 15 minutes, and before you know it, you're sitting there for 4 hours to watch a low-scoring 9-inning game.
Well, that's true, but certainly, in the last year with the pitch clock, I mean, that's kind of been the counterweight to it, right? Because I mean, the game really has quickened.
Well, yeah.
What people ask me that all the time. What do I feel about the pitch clock? And like pretty much every new rule, I am philosophically opposed to it, but practically I have no problem with it. What is your thought about speeding up the game?
Well, I mean, the one thing I would ask you about the pitch clock, which I really don't like, just because it seems artificially imposed on, a game that is
Agreed.
essentially a pastoral game, um, and you're imposing a mechanical element onto it that doesn't need to be there. And what I would say to that is, it seems to me that all you really needed, rather than have a pitch count, was just to have the umpire refuse to let the batters step out of the box between pitches. And if they could, if a batter, and if you go back and you watch games on YouTube from the 60s and 70s, which I love to do, you'll notice that the batter either is in the box for the entire at bat, meaning the pitcher can throw the ball at any point that he has the ball, um, or if he steps out, it's just long enough to let the pitcher get the signals, but he's stepping into the box essentially on the pitcher's schedule. And I think if they could have instituted, um, or actually, now that I think about it, this was actually on the books, that the umpire does not have to grant the batter timeout, that the umpire simply can ask the pitcher to throw the ball, whether the batter's in the box or not. I think if you would have gotten a few batters getting strikes on them while they were adjusting their batting gloves outside of the box, I think that would have done, I would say, I don't know, 75%, maybe 90% of the virtues of the pitch clock, and you wouldn't have had to institute it at all. But I don't really understand what the objection was to just enforcing that rule, that the umpire can call timeout and the batter can't.
David Ortiz, and I don't think I'm making this quote up. David Ortiz was asked about why he steps out of the box after every pitch, and he said something along the lines of, "This guy's getting ready to throw the ball at me at 100 miles per hour. I need to compose myself and think about what to expect." And
Well, yeah, and I think that's exactly right. I think that if he felt he needed that time, my answer to that would be, did Ted Williams need that time? Did Babe Ruth need that time? No, they didn't have the time. They didn't get the time. I mean, obviously, it's an advantage for the batter to step out of the box and think, okay, let's see. He threw me a curve last time. He's probably setting me up for his fastball, but there's a runner on first base. So what are the odds that the run and to really think this through, obviously that's to the batter's advantage. But my point is that batters seem to do pretty well before they were allowed this extra time. And I think that extra time comes at the expense of my enjoyment of a nice 2-hour baseball game.
Very good point. There's one thing about the rule changes that no one has ever been able to justify to me, the fan. That's the phantom runner in extra innings. Start with Eric on this one.
I could deal with every one of the rule change that's come in the last couple of years. Increasing the size of the bases, making a pitcher pitch to at least 3 batters unless you're ending an inning. I mean, the number of Giants games I've gone to and watching Bruce Bochy change pitcher after pitcher after, with every at bat, it drove me crazy. Yet I didn't really think that was something that should have been outlawed. I mean, it's kind of manager's prerogative, it's strategy, and if he uses all his relief pitchers and when the game goes into extra innings, well, too bad on him. But this thing about the runner on second base, that is the one I could never ever accept. That one. That is just, you used the word before, artificial, and that is completely artificial to me.
It bastardizes the entire rule book when you think about it, as does the throwing over to first base 2 or 3 times, and then the runner gets carte blanche. Carte blanche.
Carte blanche. Yeah.
Okay.
What do you think about the runner at second, Stephen?
I think it's fabulous for T-ball.
Exactly.
That's excellent to institute that. Where you just need the game to be over, and you got fathers and mothers sitting in the stands saying, "Can we get out of here already?" And they're desperate for one of the 6-year-olds to hit the ball out of the infield, which could take all day.
Right.
Aside from that, I just don't see it.
Right. No, I'm sure you've heard it called the Manfred Man, right?
I'm sorry?
I'm sure you've heard it called the Manfred Man.
No, I haven't. What's that about?
Well, I mean, Manfred Mann was one of the British invasion rock groups. So I think because Manfred is the one that instituted this policy, they're just calling it the Manfred Man.
Okay. Now I get the reference. I didn't get.
And you could use it whenever you want.
But tell them you got it from Eric.
I will credit Eric whenever I use that in the future.
The thing I love about talking baseball is that it just reminds you of so many things. You mentioned Ron Hunt, and my memories of specifics from that time are not great. I mean, I don't even remember the first Met game I went to. I don't even remember seeing Tom Seaver pitch, although I clearly did. But I loved Ron Hunt. I mean, he was just great. And of course, as you know better than I, didn't he set the all-time record for hit by pitch?
Oh, yeah. He held it for a long time before I think Baylor came along and broke the career record for hit by pitch. And I don't know, Hunt might even hold the one season record. I think he got plunked 50 times one year while he was with the Expos. And I don't know if anybody's broken that since. It's possible.
He was the first legitimate all-star that the Mets ever had. I think it was 63. He made the all-star team. Now, Richie Ashburn made it in 62, but it was only because it was a rule that they had to have a representative, right? A representative. but Hunt made
Yeah,
the
well,
All.
each team had to have a representative, right? So they
Right.
elected Ashburn in '62, and actually it was Duke Snyder in '63, and Hunt made the All-Star team by being voted in as a player in '64 when
Right.
the All-Star game was played in Shea Stadium.
He was kind of a red ass, if you will. He wasn't really beloved in any of the teams he played for. I remember.
I tried tracking some of that down, Ralph. I spoke to a couple of his teammates a few times, and I would always bug them, asking them, what is it, that behind these rumors that Hunt wasn't beloved by his teammates? And I guess his teammates were a little bit too um, politically correct to divulge any information. They sort of implied that I was right, but they never gave me any examples. I think I asked at least two, Frank Thomas and Bill Wakefield, who was a relief pitcher for the Mets in 1964. But supposedly, he was just widely disliked by his teammates and his opponents alike, because he was just a crabby guy. He was uh, very competitive. He was not very sociable, and
Reminiscent.
I loved him. He was just like the greatest thing in the world to me because he didn't really care what people thought about him. He just wanted to win, and the '64 Mets and all the teams of that era, just didn't seem to have his same passion.
And again, as I said before, things just, one thing leads to another. I wound up kind of working with Bill Wakefield in the San Francisco Little League out here. And
Whoa.
well, we can talk about that another time. Let's just say he was what you would expect as a Little League manager from a former player.
Was that good, or did he put
No,
the kids too much?
he had it's a long story, but he had the best team, and he continued to play his best players, the vast majority of the time. And real, even when his team was slaughtering other teams, the lesser players played the minimum, which was like 2 innings at one at bat. Um, he was a former player, is now a manager. But when I think about those Mets teams, and that's I grew up as a Yankee fan because that's the only team that was there when I started paying attention. And as I've said before, when you have Mickey, you love baseball, you live in New York, and you have Mickey Mantle running around the outfield and hitting home runs. What more do you need? But I became a Mets fan because I'm from Long Island. And one of the things that amazes me more than anything else is that Ed Kranepool played with that team for 17 years. A very, really mediocre player who filled a role.
He became a great pinch hitter.
He was. I mean, I loved Kranepool. I'm not putting him down,
no,
but I don't think today you'll ever have a utility player play for 17 years on the same team.
Yeah. Milner beat out Cranepool that year in '73. And I was happy about that because he was not the most productive. He was slow afoot. Um, he was attitudinal at times. And but he did play for the same high school that Hank Greenberg played for. Um, anyway,
Did you have any thoughts about Kranepool, Stephen?
Well, I had a lot actually. I founded a website that's still going called the Cranepool Forum, uh, and it is a place where Mets fans can go and discuss all sorts of Mets related issues, and still thriving to this day. I think it was founded in 2002. So Kranepool is obviously a great symbolic figure. He's also I think he was named to the All-Star team in 1965 when Hunt was injured. And that was one of the least deserving um, elections to the All-Star team I can think of. And I think that, he's obviously very dear to the hearts of a lot of Mets fans because of his longevity
Right.
and because he, I think he batted something like 7 or 8 times for the 1962 Mets, which some people think makes him an original Met. But obviously and Mets history are very closely aligned. But I think if you look objectively at his career, he was very limited in his skills, both in terms of his ball playing and in terms of what you might call his social skills. One of the first things that I remember hearing about Kranepool was that Duke Snyder, who was, as you very well know, was just one of the greatest batters for the Brooklyn Dodgers ever, a left-handed slugger. At the end of his career, he played for the Mets, and he tried to offer Kranepool, who I think was 18 in 1963, tried to offer Kranepool a batting tip. And Kranepool sort of supposedly cut him off and just said, "You're not going so hot yourself, old man." And that sort of, typified, what I think was Kranepool's um, response to anyone in authority or in a position of leadership. He just didn't really like taking orders. And one of the stranger things I think about Kranepool is his getting sent down to the minor leagues in 1970 by Gil Hodges after they had won the pennant and after Kranepool had actually hit a home run in the 1969 World Series. And I think that was, again, a matter of attitude adjustment. He was, a ball player who thought more of his own abilities, I think, than really was deserved.
Well, he was anointed with number 7 in New York, so maybe that went to his head a little
Yeah.
bit.
Him and
May
Mantle
I, in
and Reyes.
his defense, take up for what happened between Hodges, between Snyder and Kranepool that day? Before, Kranepool was really on the bubble with the Mets, and he came very close to being sent down, which I think he might have ultimately done. But he was warned by Casey to hit a certain way, to hit up the middle or what have you, and it went against Snyder's advice. And he was, like you say, he wasn't particularly socially skilled. He was a prima donna. He followed in Hank Greenberg's shoes in college. Um, in any event, he was going against Snyder was going against the advice of Casey. Casey said, "I'm watching you all through batting practice," and Kranepool told me that when Len Randall brought him on my podcast, and he was contrite about that. He realized then that he wasn't personality wise. We're going to have to wrap it up with you, my friend. Thank you for being here.
Oh, my pleasure.
Would you come back on a regular basis?
Invite me and I'll come.
I will. Thank you. That's music to my ears. Thank you again. Be well, and we'll talk soon.
Steven, but how do we keep up with everything that you're doing? How do we keep up with you?
It's a good question. I've just started doing a whole bunch of non-baseball related things. So I'm actually cutting back on my baseball related activities.
What are you doing that's
publications go.
non-baseball? We're not just all baseball around here. What are you doing that's non-baseball?
I'm writing a couple of books that I'm either at the end of and I'm trying to market them, or I is still in the middle of composing. But these things are mostly literary rather than sports related at this point.
Beautiful.
Now, do you have a website or social media, or how do you selflessly promote yourself?
It's a good question. The answer is probably very badly. I've just been trying to work in the traditional way, through agents and publishers, and trying to get these things actually published in book form. Um, and one of them is supposedly is going to get accepted at a major publisher in a few days. Book on uh, John O'Hara, the author I've written a lot about, um, and um, I've also written a lot about the novelist Richard Yates, and that is a whole saga. I've written essentially, I've co-authored a novel with Richard Yates, who's been dead for around 30 years. I completed a novel of his, and I'm trying very hard to get the rights to publish it from his daughter, who's the executor of his literary estate. So I'm involved in a lot of stuff, but very little of it is baseball related at this point.
And a lot of it we can help you with behind the scenes, but I know Zig wanted to say something. Sorry.
I just wanted to ask you where you hang your hat these days.
No, living in Delray Beach, Florida, and I'm looking forward to doing a lot more traveling than I was able to do during the pandemic. So that was one of the advantages I thought of retiring, which I did from my professorship in 2020. But that was coincidental with the pandemic, so I really haven't gotten to travel very much at all, and I'm very much looking forward to doing a
Well, when
lot
you
of that.
come out to California, we've got a place for you in studio.
Okay, well, I might very well take you up on that, Ralph.
San
Very generous.
Francisco is beautiful. The whole area is beautiful, and we'd love to have you. You'd be an addition.
Well, that's very nice, Ralph. I appreciate that.
All right.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, give it up for Stephen Goldleaf. Everybody.
Yes, yes.
Thank you
Right.
for joining us, Stephen. Appreciate you.
Thanks. My
Oops. And I cut him off a little short. I cut him off.
That's to let the punishment fit the crime.
Well, at least it said thanks. I could hear his thanks in there, so that was a
I
good thing.
did too, and you'll be hearing that as you go to bed tonight. I cut him off. I cut him off, but he said thanks.
Yes, he
I
did.
cut him off, but he said thanks.
That's right. So that was an interesting interview. I really enjoy and appreciate the people you bring on board, because it's not just baseball, it's not just politics, it's not just life, it's not just authors.
It's
Like
all
Eric,
of those
it's
things.
all the above and more.
Right. And, I've had 10 years of doing this, so I've made a lot of friends who would love to come back. And now that it's a video, and we're never going to be at loss for interesting people with a passion.
With a passion.
You got to have a passion, and you got to have opinions without being opinionated. And you notice that all of these folks have nothing to gain about being right or wrong. They're just talking, and that's what we all do. Eric, are you having fun?
It's always fun doing this.
Staying up late with the big kids?
Playing in our digital sandbox, if you will.
Staying up a little bit too late, right?
I hear you.
No more dinner at 4 p.m. for this man over here.
Oh, that's City Slickers, right?
That's City Slickers. There
No,
you
no,
go.
We eat too late, and I go to bed too late.
Here's another reference to City Slickers. Before you know it, you'll be doing one-handed push-ups like Jack Palance.
Yeah.
Hanging out with us, that's what you'll be doing. So what do we got else going on? I know that we have in hour 2 that we have
Robert Cole.
Robert Cole's going to be joining us. So what are we going to segue on now? What do you want to talk about? I know you have you always have what is it now? I almost forgot what my Yiddish term was last week. You have an axe to grind, which is, but you call it.
I was thinking about this I set it up to have an axe to grind. Today, I had no axe to grind. We're talking about the Mets. We're still alive. Bud Harrelson, the beloved Met, suffered 10 years with Alzheimer's disease. He's gone. Sometimes I just look at myself, I say, life is pretty good.
Right.
And so I swore I wore my Met shirt
I
today.
noticed that.
And how can I have an axe to grind on a day like this? But ask me in 5 minutes, I may.
All right, there you go. And I want to. What was it? What is the term? The Yiddish term for
Kvetching?
kretching?
Yeah, my kvetch of the day.
Your kretch of the week or the
I
day.
told you I'm teaching him Yiddish. Kvetch is a great word.
You'll have to read the book The Joys of Yiddish.
Yes.
Okay.
By Leo Roston.
Roston.
And it's a most Yiddish words you just can't simply find an equivalent in English. There's and this book, The Joys of Yiddish, he takes a lot of the words and he has stories that illustrate the use of the word. I mean, my favorite word in Yiddish maybe is mensch. And mensch literally
we talked about that.
Did we talk about that last week?
Yeah,
It means a man, but it really means something far more than that.
Right, and I think I simplified the term really down to kind of, anyway, you can't really finite it, but it's not just a good man. It's more than it's
Exactly.
a well-rounded kind of community.
Right.
Community, I want to say, gives to his community.
A good person, a person of substance, more than just a man. That's correct.
Right.
Who does what he says he's going to do.
Okay.
And that's really important. It was when I was an insurance manager. You may not even know this.
Well, I think I just found that out recently, yeah.
For many years. And one of the aptitude tests referred to doing what he's going to do, what he says he or she said they were going to do. It's very important. If you can't help someone, say you can't help somebody, but don't tell them you can help them and then not help them.
Right.
For instance, in whatever you're doing, don't pull off more than you can chew.
Well, I do that a lot. And I think it's because I want to help everybody, and I have a real hard time saying no.
Well, you have to be disciplined for their sake.
Right.
Because if you're not there for them, you want to help, but if you're not helping because you bit off more than you can chew,
right,
it makes it difficult.
Yeah, the quality and the quality of my output has really gone down. And so things are starting to slip my mind, and the actual stuff am doing. Like I said, I'm not putting out the quality. I'm a perfectionist, and nowadays it's like, that'll work. That'll make it through.
If you have more than you can chew, it has to work. You don't have a choice, and the business is running you rather than you running the business.
Oh, absolutely.
And be a good money manager. These are all things I've learned. I'm 77, for Christ's sake. And I wish I had I been a good money manager from the get-go, and if I weren't in debt from the first day I got out of the Air Force, I have a story that used to be mildly amusing about having just enough money to set myself up in the insurance business when I got out of the service, but by mismanaging that money, that it made me a victim of the business, because if you don't have money to fall back on when things are tough, it changes you, changes the way you are. People see it. If you're trying to convey an argument, well, they see that you need it more than they do.
Right.
And and then you're a loser. So you have to work twice as hard to break even as you would. Not only that, you've accumulated debt with interest. So if I could reach out there inadvertently, this is all off the top of my head. I wasn't planning to preach. Be a good money manager. Put money away. Had I at 22 put $100 a month away and didn't touch it,
Well, I think
I'd be a millionaire. Literally, have $1 million.
we all
with the
have, I
interest.
think, bits of wisdom that we collect along the way, and we don't realize it until, oh, I wish I knew that then. And here, I'm going to have that tool in my toolbox now. But now, is it going to serve me in the future?
Yeah.
And money management, I think, is always going to help someone.
And learn from other people who have experienced real success and what it takes.
Well,
I watch reels, and some guy manages to talk to people with gelt. That means money, real money, gelt, and they all have in common, it seems, that they will never buy anything unless they have the cash to put it on.
Right.
Because if you accumulate any sort of interest debt, it's going to screw you up for life.
In other words, whatever investment you have, you better be able to purchase it outright or.
Exactly. If you buy a couch, you better buy a couch with cash as a young person.
Instead of being one of those people.
Or you'll still be paying for that couch on some level 30 years
Well,
later.
I was just going to say, Eric, isn't it one of those things, you always see those things right around the new year? Hey, nothing down for 12 or 24 months.
I don't understand that. Yeah, I mean,
it's a marketing thing, right?
Well, it is,
and
right?
They're thinking, okay, they're going, hey, we're going to attract the people that don't have the money, that probably shouldn't be spending the money,
right?
But we're going to get them, and we're going to get the money one way or the other, either from the customer or on the back end from our insurance.
Yeah, I somehow don't think that those all come to a good end.
No.
I don't know anything about money. I did a very smart thing. I married a woman who knows what she's doing as far as money. And
yeah, I married, so my wife is the numbers lady.
Yeah.
And she handles the cash. I would have no problem if I actually made a paycheck every week. If I came in at the end of the week and she gave me a kiss and I gave her my check, it would be fine.
Yeah, but
because I know I'd actually have money next week when I handed her
the problem
the check.
you'd have, because I know you and I know how you are, if you were just working for a paycheck, your creativity would be gone.
Oh, yeah.
You'd be working for somebody else and you'd be resentful of that. You gotta be.
I have to be constantly creating.
You gotta be you.
Yeah.
Whatever it takes. And if you sacrifice something in that, you still remain you.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I think that's one of those things you always dream about. Hey, when I win the lottery, I'm still gonna work in some form, right? Mm-hmm. Because it has to be something that drives you and gets you up in the morning and motivates you, right?
Yeah. Hey, tell us about your books.
Yes, please. Give us some shameless plug, Mr. Gray.
Some fill until we get Robert on the air.
All right.
But
so as you got,
I want to know specifically, what do you like about the whole process of being an author, which entails marketing and selling the books, blah, blah, blah. And what don't you like?
All right. I don't like the marketing and I don't like the sales. As you know, Ralph.
But then tell me about what you're really getting a joy about in this book.
I will. So
what is it?
I have 2 books, and they're called Bases to Bleachers and Backyards to Ballparks. And each of them is a collection of stories, people's memories that in one way or another touch upon baseball. Most of them, not all of them, most of them are not play of game. They're personal stories. It could be about meeting a player or falling in love at a ball game or catching or not catching a ball. What I've loved about this process, about this project and the whole process, was how I went about acquiring the stories. Again, it's kind of a lot there, but the process of meeting people and getting their stories and becoming friends with people. I mean, this has been the really remarkable part of this whole process. The personal aspect, the sharing of great stories. I mean, Stephen was talking about Duke Snyder and the Mets, and there's a great story in the book that has to do with Duke Snyder and um, being in center field and a ball going to Marv Throneberry, who many of us remember could not play defense well, and he went after the ball and he fell down, and instead of backing him up, Snyder just started to laugh, and this was literally during a game. And and I would like to get that story to Stephen, but it's the being able to share stories. It's provided a lot of joy to a lot of people.
That's great. Being able to provide joy to a lot of people. That means a lot. Mm-hmm. Glad you're here. Let's meet Robert Cole.
Tell us about Robert Cole before we jump in with him.
Robert Cole is retired, living in Florida. He's a Met aficionado.
Okay.
And he was an old Brooklyn Dodger fan for years. He can talk for hours about the history of why the Dodgers moved. And he will tell you that being a Met fan is great. I'm a lifetime Met fan. He's a lifetime Met fan. That may be true, but nothing will replace the New York Gents and the Brooklyn Bums. That rivalry will stand forever. Robert Cole, tell us about that rivalry.
All right, joining us from Florida. There we go. Robert Cole.
How you doing, guys?
You heard my rant about the Dodgers and the Giants. Am I correct?
Yes, I did, and that's one of the reasons why O'Malley grabbed Stoneham, and the both of them went to California. Stoneham wanted to go to Minneapolis, and O'Malley wouldn't hear of that.
Yeah, and we're about the same age. I know Eric is a little younger, but when the Giants and Dodgers left New York, tell us a little bit about what it did to the spirit of the city.
Oh, it changed it a lot. I mean, just in my own family, my brother.
Sorry.
Okay. Okay, it changed, just in my own family, okay? My grandfather left for work wearing a Brooklyn Dodger hat. And when the official word came that the Dodgers officially were moving to LA, he came home wearing a New York Yankee hat. And he said that if it was good enough for Red Barber, it was good enough for him. So, that's the way my family was. My father stopped being a baseball fan. My brother stopped being a baseball fan. My father still took me to games because he knew how much I loved baseball. So we went to Yankee Stadium a lot, and I became a fan of the 7 other teams that played the Yankees. Okay. Yeah, I had a Detroit hat, I had a Boston hat, I had a Chicago White Sox hat. Never liked the Yankees. It just really changed things. And then when the Mets came along, it caused an excitement again. All the old Brooklyn Dodger fans that were making the trip to Philadelphia when the Dodgers, played the Phillies, Connie Mack Stadium. Now they would finally have a team to root for, and it was fun again.
We were talking about Ed Kranepool before, and I forgot to mention this. When Ed Kranepool came up in '62, they had a banner day. And one of the banners read, "Is Ed Kranepool washed
Over
up?"
the hill.
Over the hill. He was
Right.
17 years old, and he played a lackadaisical game at that point. He was a prima donna. And Eric mentioned before, he's amazed that Eric is that Cranepool lasted all this time.
I mean, you will never see a mediocre utility player, which is essentially what he was. I mean, he only played first base, but when will you ever see somebody of that caliber play 17 years for the same team? I mean, it's like what it's got to be one of the great statistics in baseball history, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
Who was
and
your first? Who was your first favorite baseball player as a Met, as a fan, when you were a kid? We're the same age. It was so great to have them back. Um,
well, initially, Gil Hodges, who was always my favorite player, was my favorite player. Um, then Rod Keneal kind of, caught my fancy the way he played. He
I'm
you
was
with
know,
you. I'm
Buffalo.
with you on Hot Rod Keneal.
yes, yes. When Hot Rod Keneal blew his leg out, his knee out, he was confined to a hospital, Lenox Hill Hospital, and my
Yep, remember
grandfather
it.
had been there. And I remember as a kid, I'd call everybody. I'd call Rod Keneal at the hospital. We talked for I wouldn't say hours, but a lot of conversation. He was confined. He had somebody he was happy to talk to. And about, must have been 20 years later, before he died naturally, I caught up with him. Wasn't doing this yet, but I was calling a lot of players. As I don't know if you remember, I called him and I said, I don't know if you remember talking to me when your knee was hurt at Lenox Hill, and he did. You remembered that, and Hot Rod. I remember the first exhibition game the Mets played against the Yankees. Hot Rod played in that game and impressed Casey and made the team. The guy I was very disappointed in on that first team was Charlie Neal. He was expected to be much more. He was rookie of the year in '59. This was only '62. He was played short, played second. He was horrible as a Met. I got to tell you.
Yep.
Um,
It was very exciting when they made the trade. They traded Lee Walls, who they had
right?
gotten in the expansion draft, for Charlie Neal. And I know I was excited, and a lot of fans were excited because he was an all-star with the Dodgers in Los Angeles, and he was just a total flop.
Do you,
Yeah.
do you remember this guy? I think he might have been the first game I was ever at, but then again, I don't really remember the first game I was ever at. Power hitting outfielder Larry Elliott.
Oh yeah.
Yes,
He didn't
yes,
last long, as I remember.
He had a great spring training once. I remember, and made the team. He was a good ball player. Um,
he, yes, he was.
wow, Larry Elliott. I have. I know I have his baseball card.
Yeah, I recreated because my mom threw out all my cards, so I've gone back through the magic of eBay and gotten all my old
Yep,
Yankees and Mets cards.
Yes.
Let
yep.
let me
And
let's skip a few years because when your favorite players have always been Mickey Mantle and Tom Seaver, it's really difficult to make the claim I'm about to make, which is that I tend to like the lesser known players. One of my favorite players was the fourth or fifth starter in the Mets rotation in 1969, Jim McAndrew. Uh,
yes,
when I look at the stats on his card, and there's something interesting about his card as well that I talk about later, is even a fifth starter back then had an ERA of like mid threes. What are your thoughts about McAndrew and what he brought to the team?
Solid.
well, he was a solid starter. I mean, Gil Hodges, depended on him. Uh, he came in, he ate up innings. I mean, in those days, the starters were expected to try to go nine,
Right.
Okay, at least 7, okay, if not 8, you know, which is totally different than today's game. And you know, he did that. You know, he gave them every fifth day a solid start. I mean, that whole staff was solid as far as going deep in the games. Uh, and then when they had to come out in the sixth or seventh inning, you had Ron Taylor would come in and wouldn't just pitch one inning, but he pitched 3 innings.
Right.
Okay, to get the save. It was a totally different game.
Was it a
Uh,
5-man rotation at that point? Was
Yeah.
McGann, because that team had, of course, they had Seaver and Koosman and Gentry and Ryan
Ryan.
and McAndrew. Was it a
Yeah.
5-man rotation at that point?
Yes, pretty much. Now Ryan couldn't make some starts because he had a blister problem.
Okay.
Okay, and McAndrew would step into that role.
And they
Uh,
had service, National Guard or whatever it was.
Oh,
Vietnam
correct.
was
Called away.
going
Correct.
on, and guys,
Right.
including Harrelson, who we talked about before, was in the reserves. And so, yes, McAndrew played a big part. And not every reliever um, had a low ERA like that. Fifth starter, rather,
Right.
had a low. The Mets were exceptional.
They
You
were.
look at the fifth starters on many teams, and that's what did it that year. It was truly a miracle year. That was,
Yeah.
I'm going to tell you one little thing about that McAndrew thing, which is why I really brought it up. So I spent my whole working career, with the Department of Labor overseeing job training programs. And one of them for the last 30 years was a program called Job Corps. I don't know if you know what Job Corps is. It's
Yes.
job training for underprivileged youth, mainly residential program. All right. So I go back and I collect all these cards from all of my favorite players and all these teams. And, I turn over Jim McAndrew's card. And there, you remember they used to have those little kind of cartoonish things, and in the corner there's some kind. They said Jim teaches for Job Corps in the off season, and not only, of course, was it astonishing to remember that back in those days, the players had to get a winter job, but I saw this Job Corps thing, and it just totally it blew my
Yeah.
mind. And I tried to contact him. Somebody gave me an address that turned out to not be correct. I just wanted to contact him. The address was somewhere there in Arizona, and it came back to me as undeliverable. But that may be another reason why I love McAndrew so much.
You should have had Ralph call. Ralph calls everybody.
I call everybody. Nobody
Well,
answers.
now I
sometimes,
know.
But
Did you,
they
Ralph?
u-
Did you tell the story about calling Joe Torre?
Oh, I did one time. They're out. The Mets are out in San Francisco, and it was right after they got Dougie Flynn and Norman and Steve
Oh,
Henderson
that's the Seaver
and
trade.
Yes.
Pat Zachary.
Can't
And
talk about that.
And as a matter of fact, I'd go out to baseball games at Candlestick Park in those days, dressed in this outfit, the same sweatshirt as I'm wearing right now. I keep all my Met paraphernalia. My father called it chazarai, pig shit, all junk. Um, but I kept it all, and I love it all. And so they're playing. Tavares is the shortstop, and Flynn is playing second. And Flynn came to the Mets with the reputation of being a great fielding second baseman, but could
Right.
also play shortstop. And Tavares was, I don't remember, he was a stiff compared to, he was a good hitter, but compared to Flynn, he was a stiff. So I found out what hotel the Mets was staying at in San Francisco. I was in Sacramento, and I just called them one day at the hotel. It was after a game, but I know there was one more game left to be played. It must have been Saturday night. And I said, we talked about I'm from New York, Brooklyn days, his brother, just chatted with him as I will tend to do. And I said, "May I ask you a question? Have you ever considered playing Flynn at shortstop?" He goes, I don't remember what he said, but I said, he said, thanks for talking. The next day, Flynn was at short for the first time ever as a Met. And either Tavares played second or sat on the bench. And it might have been Tim Foley I'm thinking about, but they were the same kind of. Tim Foley I liked. He was a gutsy guy, but I really thought Flynn was terrific. He was the only. Zachary was
Zachary
decent.
was good. Henderson was good.
They were
None
no
of them,
Steve. It
no,
broke.
God, no. None of them were great, but
No.
it was not a, God help me for saying this, it was not a bad trade in the sense that they got back serviceable players. It's just,
Right.
it's
It was.
just,
It
you
was
don't trade Tom Seaver.
no, and it was bad for everything.
Yep.
Everybody. Uh,
I
how'd you feel about being a Met fan when they trade Seaver and Kingman on the same day?
Oh
for a
yeah.
little, for a little while, and
And
I want to, I'd like to send this to you if I can. For a little while, I was writing for an online baseball magazine, and I wrote a piece on what was the worst trade in Mets history. Now, obviously, this is not quantifiable; it's everybody's opinion, and I was asking people to give me their opinions. And to me, it really came down to, was it the Seaver trade or was it the Nolan Ryan trade? And I guess if you look at the Nolan Ryan trade and you call it that, it's because of what happened going forward. With the Seaver trade, it was kind of the now, right? Um, but I'll email you that piece because you
hey,
might enjoy
the
it.
worst trade they ever made, it could have been Paul Blair. It could have been Amos Otis. They had both those guys and gave them away.
You don't trade Tom Seaver.
No, no, of
You,
course.
you don't
No,
trade Tom Seaver.
no,
That will always be
Yeah.
the he will always be the greatest Met of all time, and it will also always be the worst trade that they ever made.
no question.
Yeah. But for Amy Sotis, they got Joe Foy,
Yes, I know.
the great Joe Foy.
Um, we got 30 minutes. What do you want to talk about, Robert Cole? It's been a long time that I've been trying to get you on this program.
Oh, busy guy, you know.
I know.
Down here in
Talk about
Florida.
your umpiring career, if you would. How that got
Oh yeah.
started.
Well, I did high school and college baseball for almost 25 years. It was a lot of fun. I wish I could still be doing it now, except my knees, my back, and several concussions decided otherwise.
Your cataracts would fit right in with
Well,
today's umpires.
I had plenty of fans telling me I couldn't see when I could see, so that doesn't matter.
How
But it
did
was a
you
lot of
handle
fun.
that? How did you handle that? Fans,
Oh,
not players, but fans who
well, most of the time you block that out. Although a couple of times I had fans removed, for getting too crazy and too personal. But for the most part, you just block it out. I mean, when the game's going on, you really don't hear them.
Robert,
All you have is tunnel vision.
I've written a couple of books about people's baseball memories, and the second book has a chapter on umpires, and a few of
Mhm.
them have to do with interactions with fans. Do you have a great memory, a great, maybe a funny one, a dramatic one about an interaction you had with a fan while you were umpiring? Anyone
Uh,
particular?
yeah, in fact, it was an elderly lady. It was the grandmother of one of the players. Okay, and she was just on me constantly. Okay, I finally got to the point where, in between innings, I went back to her and I said, "Ma'am, would you like to come out here and do this for a little bit, and we'll see how you can do?" And you know, her uh, her son, which was the father of the player, finally pulled her aside and got her to shut up. But you know, the parents, of high school games, the parents could be brutal,
Brutal.
especially the mothers.
It affects the kids. It gives them an attitude of they're not going. If their parents don't respect the umpire, is the kid gonna respect the umpire?
Well, I know in this particular case with the grandmother, the player was so embarrassed,
Embarrassed.
very embarrassed, and it was crazy. I'll tell you another quick one. I was a school bus driver uh, for many, many years, and the last day of school one year, some kids crashed the back of my bus. The following year, I'm doing a baseball game, and the catcher was one of those players, one of those boys that crashed my bus. And I get behind him. He's taking the warm up pitches from the pitcher. And I said, "Guess who's standing behind you right now?" And he goes, "Who?" I said, "Well, you remember a couple of years ago when you trashed Mr. Cole's bus on the last day of school?" And he goes, "Oh, shit." And then, he had his coach come out, and the coach came out and said, he just told me about what happened. You're not going to hold that against him. And I said, "Of course not." But I told him, "You better tell him to be swinging at the first pitch he sees."
That's a great story.
Mm,
That's a great story.
That's good.
But that was a learning lesson. The coach said, "Thank you." And he actually went back and he told his players, he said, "You never know who you're going to run into. You never know what's going to happen." We used to have scouts, major league scouts, come up and talk to us after games, not to talk to us about what the players could do on the field, but what their attitudes were. Okay, how they handled themselves with us. You know, what were their hang-ups, or did they get on us? And that was very important. It's not just what they see on the field, but it's also their makeup, and they're very aware of what goes on. A lot of these guys don't understand that.
Just to let you know, Robert, there's something that's hitting your microphone every once in a while. I don't know if it's your earbuds, but I think every once in a while we hear you hitting it. Just to let you know.
Oh,
But otherwise,
okay.
we heard you loud and clear. Sorry about that.
No problem.
Robert, where did you get your umpire training? Did you go to any of the schools, the Wendelstead School, or
No,
any?
not any of those schools. Now, we had a umpire association where every year before the season started, we had major league umpires come and talk to us, evaluate us, um, stuff like that. The umpire schools are great. Uh, by the time I got into umpiring, I was already 40. All right. So, I knew that I wasn't going to go anywhere past high school, college. So, going to one of the umpire schools, which you have to do if you want to go any further in baseball. But we used to have major league umpires come in and evaluate us and work with us.
Talk to the kids. What's the path that one takes if they have that passion really early? And because that's what it takes, the competition. You got to be young. Like you said, you were 40. Where would you start? How would you, how, if you
Well,
had a kid that was wanting to do that, what would you tell the parents to advise them?
all youth leagues here in Florida um, have programs where they try to get younger people to get involved with the little league, some of the other leagues. Our umpire association, reached out to the high schools and try to get, high school students who maybe weren't good enough to play on the team, to come learn how to umpire. And if they still have that passion after a couple of years, uh, go to one of these umpire schools. I mean, that's the way you go. Unfortunately, nowadays it's very political. You know, you see grandsons and great grandsons of umpires that we remember from the 50s and 60s, umpiring now. So it's very difficult, for somebody to make it up there. And if you're not in doing AAA baseball by the time you're 28, you can forget about going to the major leagues.
How soon do you think it's going to be, or how long until we have a woman umpire in the major leagues?
Not long at all. I mean, I worked with some female umpires doing college games, and they can be every bit as good. Uh, it's unfortunate you don't see many even in the minor leagues.
It's
So
yeah. I mean, it's kind of hard to believe. I mean, obviously there are women refs in the NBA. I don't really follow football, so I don't know about that. But there,
they're also in the NFL. They're in the NBA.
yeah. I mean, you
They're
see a
in
lot
the
of women refs in
NFL.
the NBA, and it's just, I mean, I can't think of a single reason why a woman should be an umpire in Major League Baseball. Makes no sense.
No, no, it does not. Um, and hopefully before long, we'll have one. But uh, the two sports that don't have one yet are hockey and baseball. And there are female hockey officials doing the women's professional league. So I don't see why you wouldn't have one in the NHL
Right.
before too long.
Robert, in your umpiring career, did you ever umpire a game with a kid who grew up to be a major leaguer?
Yes, uh, several of them. Okay, some of the names are now going to escape me, but yes, there have been several. Now, one of the best pitchers I ever saw in high school happened to be Tom Foley's son. You remember Tom Foley,
Not
former
Tim
major league?
Foley.
No, not Tim Foley. Tom
There were
Foley.
two Tim Foleys, by the way, but I don't remember Tom Foley.
Okay, he played and he also coached for the Mets for a number of years, and also for the Tampa Bay Rays. But his son was fantastic. Unfortunately, blew his arm out, and you're starting to see a lot more of that Tommy John surgery in high school players.
Right.
Even little league players are having Tommy John surgery, and it's because they want them to win so badly. In the youth leagues, they make them pitch so often, and their arms wear out before they're 17, 18.
John Smoltz said, I believe I'm correct about this. He said that one of the reasons that you're having so many injuries with pitchers is because they play baseball year round, and they're not doing what kids used to do, which is, it's winter time, you play football. It's, then it's basketball, and then it's baseball. Do you think there's some
Correct.
credibility to that?
Oh, absolutely. Okay, coaches now will not let them play other sports. Okay, the football coach absolutely wants them to just work on weights and stuff like that during the summer. Baseball coaches don't want them doing any other sport. Basketball coaches don't want them doing any other sport, and so they do their sport constantly. Uh, a lot of players, in the olden days, they some of them played four sports.
Right.
They played basketball, baseball, football, you
Maybe
know,
track or right,
and track and ran track.
right,
Jackie Robinson, for instance,
right.
you want to go back that far.
Yeah, it
So
certainly that certainly takes the fun out of it. I mean, my son played uh, baseball and basketball and soccer. I mean, soccer turned out to be his great sport, but he enjoyed playing them
yep,
all.
yep.
Mm.
And what happens now is you have little league. Okay, little league is small fields. 60 feet bases, right? The dropout from going to the small field to the large field is tremendous. Guys that could put the ball over the fence in that small 200 feet, from home plate fences, suddenly go out on the big field 300, 325, 350, and they quit. They don't see themselves as being able to do that.
Well,
Well,
that,
they
And
don't see the advantage in being able to hit and run, get the runner over. Um, the nuances in baseball have really been eliminated. Um, and
people, okay, they don't teach the basics. Okay, I don't know how many guys in the major leagues even know how to bunt anymore. Okay, back in the 50s, okay, they would ask Mickey Mantle to bunt. They would ask Duke Snyder to bunt. They would ask Gil Hodges to bunt in certain circumstances when it
not
was
only
important
ask
to get
them,
the
they
runner over.
use it as an offensive tool. Mickey Mantle was the greatest drag bunter around, and he could
they could
from the
fly,
from the left
and he
side
could
he
fly.
could fly. And
Yes,
So,
yes, good.
so this is interesting now because it brings back to me something that again that I've heard. I assume is correct. We're talking about fundamentals. What I remember reading is that on the first day, and everybody thinks Casey Stengel was a dummy, which of course he wasn't. I remember reading that on the first day of spring training, what he would do is he would gather his entire team at home plate and say, "This is home plate," and then proceed to tell them everything that went on at home plate, and then walk them down to first base. This is first base, and proceed to do the same thing. Have you heard that story?
Yes, yes.
yeah. As a matter of
And
fact, Hobie Landreth told that story on my podcast about just what you say.
Okay.
He'd walk them around the bases, teach them the nuances, cutting the corner, little tricks. Casey Stengel was no
No
dummy.
dummy.
He invented the spring training school. What they
right,
call
they used to have a camp before spring training actually started.
right.
Okay, where they taught, they bring the young players in, and it was an instructional camp that he would have, and a lot of teams adapted that.
Plus, remember 1949 to 1955 or 53 rather, 5 in a row. It's the greatest dynasty we ever saw, and Casey managed and started out in center field with an aging Joe DiMaggio, and that he brought Mantle in.
Right.
The man was incredible, the best manager that we've ever seen, just by purely success. And that was not the first dynasty, the 5 in a row. He also had years where the Yankees dominated in the late 50s, early 60s. And Casey was terrific.
You know what?
Um,
His best managing job, however, was those first couple of years with the Mets.
uh, for
Okay,
the
he had
fans,
he had a
all of
right.
that.
He had a
Um,
terrible team. He had a terrible team, but he
he
brought the
won the
fans.
press. He'd sit up all night and drink with them,
Yep, yep.
and they'd report not the Rod Keneal errors, but the Rod Keneal good plays, uh, as an example.
I remember going back to the Mets of that era. I remember a quote that Roger Craig, who ultimately became a very good manager and I assume pitching coach.
Right.
Somebody asked him
Yeah,
about the fact that he lost 23 games in one year, right, with the Mets. And he said, "Well, I guess I had to be pretty good if they ran me out there that often to lose 23 games."
That's right.
yep, yep.
That's right. And he happened to have been the pitching coach before managing the Giants with Detroit in the year
Right,
they
right,
won.
right.
So Roger had a wonderful career and a wonderful
Yeah.
life. He passed
Well,
away recently.
Right,
yeah, he
But
brought the
right,
split finger into baseball.
right.
right.
He taught that to
Taught
all his pitchers.
Ray Scott that I don't know if he taught him that, but anyway, Give me a synopsis of what's going on with the Mets in this year, Robert.
Okay, well, we have to go through a 3-year period. Okay, 22, we were pleasantly surprised. Okay, we didn't expect much, and they went to the playoffs. Okay, under Buck Showalter. Last year, we were very excited, if you remember, Ralph. They picked up Verlander, and we thought, oh man, everything's going to be great. And then Diaz went down
That
early
did
in
it
the
for
World
me. I
Baseball
knew
Classic.
right then that they could never replace the closer. It was going to be getting, I mean, just,
Right.
it wasn't going to work.
Okay. And
And
then Verlander didn't pitch in the beginning because he was hurt. Scherzer, got suspended. He never got on track. And then at the trading deadline, they decided to go in a totally different direction.
yeah,
So,
what's
they
the
traded
what's the
Scherzer, they
bottom
traded Verlander.
line? What's the report card on Buck overall?
Oh, I thought he did a good job uh, with what he had last year. Like I said, guys got hurt, guys got injured. Um, I just think that with the new general manager coming in, his days were numbered, and I think he knew it also.
Hmm.
So now we go to this year, and we don't have big expectations. We still hope that they make the playoffs, the postseason. Uh, and we still have to wait and see what they wind up with because they're still in negotiations to try to get a DH. JD Martinez is still on their radar. Um, Martinez and the Mets are both interested, but apparently money is getting in the way, and I don't see why that should be a stumbling block. With Cohen, but apparently it is.
Well, I mean,
So
their rotation to me seems a little suspect still. Their outfield seems a little suspect. You know,
well, yes, yes. There's question marks. Okay, I think the key to the pitching staff is Severino. Okay, if Severino pitches like he did a couple of years ago with the Yankees, that'll be a tremendous boost. Um,
Might they still sign Snell?
I don't think so. Um, that's a good one. I mean, I don't know what's going on, with Boris and Snell and Montgomery. Um, they're still out there. I mean, you still have Gio Urshela is still out there, and both the Yankees and Mets supposedly are interested in him. Um, so there's guys. I mean, Mark Bellinger is out there still, uh, and spring training started. So I don't remember a year where so many top shelf players are still unsigned.
and doesn't it just? I mean, I get that it's a business, and I'm not oriented that way. But the fact that they haven't signed Alonso just, I mean, it's got to make every Mets fan um, edgy.
Yes, but don't forget he's now a Boris client. And when players are ready to, be on their last year, Boris wants them to play it out, uh, become a free agent, possibly sign with the Mets again, but go out there, see what the market is, and go from there. So I'm not, once he signed with Boris, I'm not the least bit surprised that he hasn't signed yet.
Okay.
What about the third base situation? Do you think Vientos or Beatty is going to take over
I
and win it?
Yeah, I really like Beatty. Beatty has hit every place he's been, say, except with the Mets so far.
Right.
And he really hasn't had a chance to play every day. Buck would play him 2 games and then not play him for 2 games. And he's a young guy. Play him every day. Find out what you have. I always remember Mike Schmidt in his rookie year hit 198, okay, over the course of the year.
Yep.
And as Casey would say, you can look it up. But you know, and look what happened with him. You know, you have a young player, play him every day. You know, I think Mark Vientos should be given a shot at the regular DH spot. Um, Now, if they sign JD Martinez, of course he won't get that opportunity. So, in my opinion, this year should be a year where they find out if Beatty is the guy that they thought he was. I think he could be. Okay, find out if Vientos, can do the job. And don't forget, if Alonso does sign elsewhere, Vientos would be the heir apparent there. So, you don't want to lose
Right.
lose his confidence.
You know, I'm a split fan, right? Mets and Giants, because I've lived out here now for, good God, 49 years, and my kids have turned me into a Giants fan.
All right, we won't hold that against you.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
It's more of an intervention anyway, Eric. It's okay.
Right.
We're here for you.
Well, I don't ever, when they ask me who my favorite team is, I will say, I'm rooting for the team that needs the win most. But there are a lot of similarities in following the Mets and the Giants. I mean, every year, but last year, with if my team isn't doing well, I will enjoy watching them play the youngsters who may not do very well, but it's kind of a glimpse of the future, right? And
Correct.
I think that the Mets and the Giants were kind of on a similar path last year. All the players that the Giants brought up, all of whom did well for the first 2 weeks, and then they tailed off. And it's the same thing with Beatty and Vientos and Alvarez, who, of course, kept hitting home runs, although his average is 205 or something like that. I think,
right.
And even the starting rotations are very similar. You have one or two good pitchers up top, and who knows what's going to happen with the next 3, 4, 5, or 6 starters. So I feel less bad watching my team not do well if they're playing people for their future, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, yeah. You have different, blueprints. Okay, I live down here. I live very close to Tropicana Field, so I'm also a Rays fan. So I am also a split fan.
Won't hold it against you.
Ha ha ha! Payback's a son of a gun, guys. Son of a gun.
But I follow the Rays every day, and I'm amazed at what they do. They bring guys up, and I follow them who I've never heard of, and they plug them in, okay, and they play well. They trade, their top starter every couple of years. They did that with Glass now this year. They traded him, and to the Dodgers of all teams, but they just keep retooling. They keep bringing up young players. Every player that comes up is hungry. They play well, and it's a totally different blueprint than, say, what the Yankees have been doing until the last couple of years. Or the Red Sox or the Dodgers. And they make it work. They make it work.
Hey,
Ralph, I've got a question for you. What's going on with the A's? Now I hear they're
oh my
having
God,
problems in Vegas again.
That is genuinely sad. As someone like you and I who lost our teams as a kid, I am very heartbroken with the children who have reached an age rooting for the A's, and they're gonna. There should be eminent domain. I will say this: the shovel is not in the ground. There's a lot of resistance. The teachers' union in Las Vegas, for instance, says you could build a ballpark, but you can't educate the kids. We're not going to go for that. So you never know. But
Well,
if there
from
were
what I heard,
eminent domain and an owner wanted to move, they'd have to offer the team to the city first, and it would be nice to have the gem of baseball parks is AT&T, and literally the A's could have built a park across the bay opposite them, just like the Giants and Dodgers did with the Polo Ground. Giants and Yankees did with the
Yankees,
Polo Grounds
Yankee
too.
Stadium.
And there's money out here. It's for another show. I don't want to bring it down, but we'll be covering it. Hey, thank you, my friend. This was terrific. Um, you are a maven, Robert Cole, and you're
Thank you,
another
sir.
maven in studio, Eric Gray. This has been a terrific podcast. Want to thank Stephen Goldleaf for being on in the first segment, and we danced. We made it good. So, Robert, promise me you'll come back from time to time, more often than not.
Whenever you
Beautiful.
want me, just give me a call.
Stay healthy, my friend. Eric, you had more fun than last time.
I had fun both times, Ralph.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks everybody for listening. Remember this: a good deed now and then is good. How about doing a good deed for me? Round up a bunch of books, used books, and take them to into the Head Start program in your own community. Kids need to be reading, and they need to develop a passion at a young age. And it doesn't do any good to give to charities that just ring the money in and do nothing for them. If you take the books physically down to the Head Start, you know it got there, and it's the best kind of charity.
Now, here's another side of that, because I'll pitch in on this, because we're going into OT. We're going into overtime, extra innings again on this one. I love it because you should also give it to the other end of the spectrum. If you don't have a Head Start program, there's going to be books that you're going to want to give that Head Start program. You could also get other books that maybe are not for adults. You can get those to the jail ministries, right? Because we
Good
need to
point.
help those people in there at some point, because they need to come back out into our society and help us a little bit,
Well,
and they should be educated.
how about we start with the kids?
We start with the kids, but we don't want to hand them
I know
a book that's not appropriate.
no. I mean,
I give
of
books
course,
and clothing.
children's books,
Right.
lightly used or new children's books to the Head Start program. Nice and simple.
Yep.
If the books are banned, just don't give it to them. I believe every kid should read banned books, but don't have them judge the donor and stuff.
Well,
Don't make waves.
There are no
Get
banned
the
books in
kids
Florida, though, right?
Oh, that was cruel.
No, don't get me started.
Yeah.
Don't
You
get
know,
me
Robert,
started.
since we met, it's been about 8, 9 years. I think you're less conservative than you were. Am I?
Yes,
Life's made
yes.
you less conservative.
A big, fat, orange-haired person has totally changed me.
I
Well,
think
that's kind of cool to have that happen,
yeah.
no
And-
matter where it comes from.
And it's kind of cool that you can admit or change. There are people that are so rigid in anything they do that they won't accept it, even if it is an orange thing. That they'll say, "Well, he's better than Biden or whatever." He's not better than Biden, and Biden
Well,
wouldn't be better than Michelle. Do the best you can, guys. We're gonna wrap it up. Thank you, Robert. Come back, Eric.
yes, sir.
What a pleasure.
Thank you, Ralph.
And thanks for having me for the ride, Zig. I appreciate you and everything you do.
Paulie B, the best producer, Edge Studios in San Francisco. Robert, come out and visit and see San Francisco.
Will do.
Come out when the Giants, when the Mets play the Giants.
Oh, that's such mixed emotion for me.
That
for
sounds like a field
all
trip,
these years.
a roller coaster
That's not,
field trip.
yep,
Right.
that sounds good.
I'll be in touch, Robert. I somehow think I tried to contact you on Messenger a number of years ago. I could be wrong about that, but I'll check when I get home.
There we go.
Okay.
For Zig in the Zone and the rest of the crew here,
Thanks.
there you go.
All I can say is thank you for listening and thank you guys for participating. My goal, have interesting, passionate people on that have opinions and are not opinionated. Once again, lived up to that as a producer, and that's the best I can do, and that's what we need to do is the best we can do, and be good to each other. Thank you again. Adios.
Adios.